Hey Amanda, the weather's been kind of terrible outside. It's been icy and gross, which is why there hasn't been a video uploaded in a while. I wanted to say a few things in response to your last video. Something that I wanted to note really quickly before we get started, some of the issues that you went over in your last video regarding the Chapel Hill shooting, it's not just about race, it's about religion, and it's about those two intersecting. So the issues within that aren't just that the victims were Middle Eastern, or just that they were Muslim. It's that they were Middle Eastern and Muslim, which have a certain stereotype in our society. I'm sure that you know that it was those two different issues rather than just the one, because Muslim isn't a race, but I feel like that needed to just be out there. Something that I've noticed with a lot of situations like the Chapel Hill shooting and different tragedies that happen, that have brought up different social justice problems, is that the general public is very bad about discussing these problems. People tend to equate the tragedy that happened to the social justice issue that these have brought into discussion. And this is a huge mistake, because when people start equating these, we're not discussing the issue at hand. For instance, when people say that Chapel Hill wasn't a hate crime because it was about a parking situation, and then proceed to move on to the next thing without even thinking about the possible issues in the situation, even though Islamophobia and racism are something that are still very alive in our society. Similarly, with all of the things that happened in Ferguson, people were arguing over whether or not Mike Brown was racially profiled, or if he was shot because of whatever other reason, stealing or attacking someone. People started saying that Ferguson was the race problem, instead of discussing the race issue that was brought up by Ferguson. Of course, talking about some of these specific cases is important, because the people in them were people, and justice needs to be served to them. However, if there's no discussion of the actual issues behind the problem, nothing will change. The thing of it is, people like being comfortable. A lot of people are okay with being complacent, especially if they are not immediately affected by the situation at hand, or if they don't see themselves as being immediately affected. And this is particularly true when the people at hand are the people perpetuating the issue. Even some of the people that are willing to admit that there's an issue will not admit if they have the upper hand in the issue. So some people are willing to point out that there's a problem, or that some people are at a disadvantage, but they will not say that they themselves are at an advantage, because then they feel like they're the bad guy, or they've been handed things. That's largely because people who are the oppressors, or are the main privileged group in society, are not taught to recognize that privilege, because we are taught that this is the norm. Anything outside of that is just different, which is definitely a helpful way of thinking. When you're just addressing people, you're not better or worse than them, you're just different. But when it comes down to recognizing power struggles, in order to achieve or work towards any sort of equality, you have to recognize who has more power, so that those people in power can help the other people get to that point as well. Most people in privileged groups are taught to think of themselves as the norm. Of course, this doesn't mean that only straight white men can fix any of this, or that they're the only ones that perpetuate it. People who are suppressed can become complacent with the way that things work, because it's just how they work, or it's just easier to go along with what everyone else is doing rather than stepping out of your comfort zone. For example, women often promote patriarchal thinking. A lot of women shame or criticize each other for what they're wearing, who they're dating, what they're doing. They're the ones that tell people to be ladylike, or that that person over there looks like a slut. Different things like that. And a lot of women don't recognize immediately what they're doing, because they don't think into what they're doing. It's just how life works. Issues come when people are complacent. Even people who know about these issues can become complacent at some point, or about certain things. For instance, if you know a whole lot about sexism and you just get sad because this is the way that things are and don't try to change anything, you're being complacent. If you know a whole lot about sexism and your only focus is on sexism, and you don't take any mind to race or ability, you are complacent in those ways, even if you're trying to be proactive within sexism. Although I can't say whatever work you would be doing with sexism without looking at other intersectionality would be super helpful. but it is definitely possible for people to be focused on those, but still losing sight of other issues. Now, how do we keep ourselves and others from being complacent? You have to be uncomfortable. You have to make people uncomfortable. And that probably sounds kind of awful, but I'm not talking about getting up in anyone's face or yelling, because that never solves anything. You, of course, have to think about what you're saying, but the point is you have to say something. You can't stay silent when you hear and see things that are problematic. If you're with one of your friends or a family member who comments on how somebody's dressed as they walk by, try to make a positive comment about that person. Wow, they must be really confident to wear something like that. Or, well, they seem happy with it, so I don't see what the problem is. If someone that you're with makes a comment about how an effeminate guy or a masculine woman look gay, kindly remind them that gender expression does not reflect sexuality. If somebody points out disrespectfully or even in genuine surprise that there are a certain amount of a specific minority in a place that you're at, mention that their comment makes you uncomfortable and is entirely unnecessary. More importantly, make sure that you're doing all of this to yourself as well. If you catch yourself making assumptions about people, mentally call yourself out on that. Are you fretting over what sex that stranger is? Ask yourself why it matters. Would it change anything? No. Are your assumptions about that person's intellect based on their race? Ask yourself, are you assuming what that person's religion is based on their race? Figure it out. Ask yourself tough questions. Nicely ask other people tough questions. It's okay to be comfortable with who you are, but you shouldn't become complacent with the world around you. That's really all that I have for today. Hopefully some of this made sense. I'll put annotations below because I was definitely thinking of a certain few articles while I was talking about all this. So I will see you hopefully on Friday.